Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Tennessee. This is how you know it's been a couple weeks since we've been doing this podcast because, I'm just stumbling through Tennessee Vols Sports Guys, not the Tennessee Vols Sports Guys. But you know what that means. I am still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Also here, over there, somewhere in Knoxville, Tennessee, Rocky Top Insider's own Ryan Schumpert. Ryan, good evening, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Tired. Not much sleep last night. Covering Tennessee basketball in Tuscaloosa and getting back to cover some Tennessee baseball this afternoon, but doing well. And I think your mispronunciation. We were just talking a little Dune before we started. I think you had Timothy Chalamet on the mind. I think that's my spin zone for you.
Oh, there you go. We watched the Timothy, and when I say we, it's very loose in terms of we in the household, the Thomas household, of watching a Timothy Chalamet vampire movie where he's like Eaters. I don't know if y'all have seen that from a couple years ago. Wife was all in, couldn't do it. It was too much for me. Couldn't. I was doing my own thing, and I was in and out of consciousness at that. I mean, look, Timothy Chalamet. Wonka, enjoyed it immensely, but this vampire movie that the good folks can check out and look up. I don't know. I don't even remember what it was called. Wife was all in, loved it. I just wasn't a big fan. Somewhere in the grainy picture over there to our far right, it's Saturday announced. Ethan, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hopefully not too grainy of a picture. I've been away from the pod for a while, but I'm happy to get back at it. Talk some Tennessee athletics, Tennessee basketball. Favorite time of year, March is here. I'm so excited. So I'm ready to talk some ball.
March is here. February flew by. January was a very long month. February flew by. It's kind of crazy that we're now in the full March Madness swing. And to talk about that, because I think that a lot of folks are wanting to talk about Tennessee basketball at this very moment. We're going to cover it all, as Ryan Schumpert wants to really, really do a deep dive all across the board and make sure we cover all three of the major sports here at the University of Tennessee Everything School HQ. 24 hours after your biggest takeaway you're still thinking about from the Vols' big-time victory at Alabama last night for you, Ryan Schumpert.
I don't know if it's my biggest takeaway, but the thing that I feel like I kind of circled back to today, and maybe partially is because I wrote about it last week, but just Josiah Jordan-James' importance to this Tennessee team and just Tennessee's versatility that I think is so crucial for their ability in a week where they go and they play an Auburn team at home who's super physical and plays a lot of big men, and we saw a lot of Tobe Awaka and Jonas Adu on the court together, and then you flip to a team that plays a completely different style in Alabama, and you have 6'6" Josiah Jordan-James playing the 5 for extended amounts of the first half, and Tennessee holding up on the glass against one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the country. Just that versatility that James gives Tennessee. I think that's the thing that a day later is really stuck out to me. I don't think Tennessee wins that game without him, and the fact that he was able to pick up 13 rebounds and just really kind of be the connector for this Tennessee team. Obviously hit a couple big shots, which we know the offense has come and go for him this season as it has throughout his career. But I don't think that really dampens his importance to this team a whole lot. And he proved that again last night. And when you talk about teams who can make deep runs in March, you talk about teams that can win in different ways. And it feels like this Tennessee team can win in a lot of different ways. And James is as important to that as anybody is.
Yeah, it was another big James game. He started out great. Obviously some foul trouble, but was able to stay on the floor for the majority of the game. They needed him out there, and he had to play some 5 because Adu and Tobe were in foul trouble early, and he stepped up. And I wondered where Barnes was going to go. He had a lot of JP Estrella, who got a lot of big-time minutes and held his own, where he's been all over the place in terms of minutes, and he's had to be ready because you never know when your number's going to be called, and it might be in the toughest game on your calendar this season. And he rose to the challenge, and I thought he was solid in his amount of time. Ethan, was Josiah Jordan-James the big takeaway for you? Was it the play of Zakai, especially hitting some really big shots? I mean, he had a really insane step back 3 that he hit at one point where you're just like the ultimate no yes shot, where Zakai, man, you keep like you can never count any kind of shot, any kind of look, any kind of play. For him was huge, and also Jemiah Mashak, who had the best sequence probably of the evening with his corner three, and then big steal after it in the second half. But what was it for you, sir?
Yeah, you could have a couple different takeaways from each of the players, especially the guys you just mentioned. I mean, Zakai was fearless. Fearless is probably the best word to describe him. Hitting the free throws at the end, those big threes. Josiah had a big three at the end, I believe, to make it a 5-point lead with around 2 remaining. I'd say to not use the cop-out answer of Tennessee can win without Dalton Connect, which is probably my biggest takeaway from like individual performance-wise. I'll just look at the macro. I'll just say Tennessee's ability to win games on the road this season in environments like that, where there was so much. I mean, Nick Saban was there. Kellen DeVore was there. Everybody from Alabama was there. And this game meant so much to Alabama with the moment. Obviously, whoever wins takes sole possession of the SEC regular season race, sole possession of the race for the 1 seed in the SEC tournament. And for all of that pressure to be on Tennessee, especially with what they did last year, losing 5 straight away games to end the regular season. I mean, for the Vols to go beat Kentucky at Rupp this year, you got a big game against South Carolina coming up. Obviously, that's going to be huge with how they're surging right now. But to go into Tuscaloosa and to be able, with Dalton struggling the way he did, and with all of the adversity from the fouls in the first half, everything that was thrown at him, for Tennessee to still be able to come back, put together that game plan to be able to get Zakai and Josiah and Jemai coming in huge. Santi, I mean, of all those people that we just named, Santi doesn't even really get the credit. I mean, he's probably 4th on the credit list, and he was incredible defensively. He hit some huge shots in the first, kind of the beginning when Tennessee started to crawl back in the second half. I just go with that, man. The fact that there was so much against them from the very beginning of that thing. They could have just given up when they're down, getting down, and Alabama's hitting all their threes in the middle of the second half. And they just keep fighting. I mean, it was as impressive of a win as I think you'll see from Tennessee this season. And one of the more impressive wins in the past couple of years, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, I penciled in the Final Four here that this was going to be the most difficult game on their calendar. And they're now past the most difficult, I think, here, because I think they have like a 70%, 76% chance of winning at South Carolina. And I would probably, the odds of them getting swept by the Gamecocks, I would put pretty slim. Like, I think if you're a Tennessee fan, you should feel good about being even with a big win for South Carolina over the weekend. I just don't see this Tennessee team going down twice to South Carolina. But then Kentucky in that offense is just playing at such an elite level that you're going to have to score a lot of points to beat Kentucky in the final 2 here. But I don't know. Does that, when you look at Bama and you look at Auburn this week, Ethan, what was the biggest difference between how Tennessee won against Auburn and how they beat Alabama on the road on Saturday?
Completely different games. I mean, different opponents, may I say. I mean, honestly, with how the flow of the game, Auburn, gets their lead, Tennessee still has to fight back. They were able to do it with Dalton Connect. They were able to do it with a 2 big lineup against Auburn. Whereas against Alabama, you have to rely on your veteran guys. You got to have Zakai going out there and facilitate. And you got to have Dalton when he's getting double teamed. He's going to be facilitating out there. And he did an excellent job of that. I mean, people aren't really going to talk about that too much, about him not scoring, but when they're doubling at the end, when Nate Oates is saying someone's going to beat us that isn't Dalton Connect, and he's able to get the ball into the hands of the other people, Josiah's hitting the shots when it's important, Jemai's making that huge 6-point swing with about 5 minutes left. For you to be doing that, I mean, it was a completely different type of late game atmosphere, in my opinion. You got Auburn, who's the best defensive team in the SEC, not named Tennessee. You got Alabama, who's the best offensive team potentially in the country, at the very least, probably the best in the SEC. So you have to have completely different game plans going from, hey, we got Auburn at home, tough game to come back and win. But you got Alabama, who's going to be a completely different animal, and you got to go on the road to beat them. And even though Barnes probably didn't expect it, Dalton Connect isn't going to have your best game. So you got to figure out a way to still be able to, kind of go through the mud and still be able to pull that out, I guess. And that says so much about Tennessee, in my opinion. That, like, last night's game, if there was anybody that was still like, I don't know, this Tennessee team, it's still going to be a struggle in March. It's still going to be your typical Tennessee team. I mean, that that's shown something that Vols fans haven't seen since 2019. It just did.
I mean, it's the best Barnes team he's ever had, I think, at Tennessee. And to Ryan's point, they just can win in so many different ways. And that was another one where we're in the group chat wondering how they're going to escape with the victory in Tuscaloosa yesterday. And I mean, Barnes talked about it after of like, it's just the veterans didn't flinch. Like the veterans just came through and they always came through. And they're just battle tested for these kind of environments. And what they did in the second half. I mean, I don't know who it was who said this was like a Barnes masterclass. Was that Josiah after the game who said that?
Yeah. Yep. I think I lost you for a second.
Oh, why would you
me.
equate this as a Barnes masterclass? Why would Josiah term it as a Barnes masterclass?
Well, it was specifically the context was the defense. And I mean, I think that's kind of to Ethan's point. What's funny about it is Tennessee played Auburn, the great defensive team, and they won that game. I mean, that was a high-level shot-making game. Both teams shot over 40% from three. It felt like Janai Broome and Dalton Connect were not going to be stopped, and it was back and forth. And then the Alabama game against one of the best offenses in the country, Tennessee's defense was fantastic. And I think probably what Josiah is getting at more than anything is it feels like Tennessee has cracked the code on how to defend Alabama more than any team in the country has. And having the personnel goes a really long way. Having Jemai Mashak and Zakai Ziegler, who you can throw at Mark Sears for not let anyone besides those two guard Sears, who's just incredibly impressive. That goes a long way. But I think you've seen Tennessee with the way they've run Alabama off the three-point line and then played in drop coverage and say, shoot a mid-range jump shot. We know you won't do it. And then having Jonas Adu, again, to the personnel to have Jonas Adu sitting under the basket, being able to block shots. It just feels like Tennessee has the plan, has the blueprint to stop Alabama. Alabama's two lowest scoring totals of the year, 70 points in Knoxville, 74 points last night, tied a handful of other games. I think South Carolina in Arizona for the second lowest. So, and then you go back to the last four games against Tennessee and Alabama. Last night was the only time that Alabama's eclipsed 1 point per possession for a team that, at least this year, I think averages 1.2 points per possession. It's just unbelievable. Tennessee, again, they clearly have something figured out, and that's how they won the game last night. All the seniors, all the veterans, they played great. They had some timely shots. You would have told me Tennessee won that game scoring 81 points last night. I wouldn't have believed you. And if you told me that midway through the second half, I told you you were crazy. There was no way that would happen. And then you look up, and Alabama goes 9 minutes without hitting a shot, and Tennessee holds them, 4 of 23 from the field at the end of the game.
Big time. I mean, big time all across the board. Who do you think who had the best performance for you, Ethan Stone, last night?
It's tough. I mean, there's so many players that went, especially in the second half, that had such fantastic games. If you have to pick between Josiah and between Zakai, I think I have to go with Zakai. The reason... The timely threes is a big reason why, but he just seemed to hit every single shot that he needed to when it came to that point. And I mean, he was playing tenacious defense the entire night. Probably the third or fourth best defender on the team last night, which is really a testament to how fantastic Jemai Mashak and how fantastic Santiago Vescovi were, because they were, I mean, just absolutely everywhere. And Zakai, I think he finished with just one turnover, which also is huge because, I mean, that's a game where I think Alabama had 12 turnovers and Tennessee had 6 or 7, something around that line. And for Zakai, when he's playing like that, when he's not turning the ball over, when he's able to facilitate and not get into his rhythm, I mean, he's one of the best point guards in the country, genuinely. He is vastly underappreciated for just how good, even with how great he has been this season. He just seems to be getting better and better.
Everyone across the board is just trending up, right? Like you just look all across the board, and Tennessee's just so deep. Like it might be Tobe coming in for Adu if Adu is in a bad matchup, or if Josiah has to play the 5 for a little bit, they can do that. If Zakai has to score a little bit more, then Zakai will score a little bit more. If Santi has to hit some big threes, Santi will hit some big threes. If Dalton has to obviously take over, Dalton will take over. And I mean, we've just seen so many iterations of Tennessee win basketball games this year that I mean, they're just going to be such a tough out come tournament time. And it's because, like everything we talked about, like they're just playing exceptionally well across the board, and they're just never out of it. Like they sometimes they'll be in these holes, or they'll have those cold streaks that we remember from a year ago, but they bounce out of the cold streaks. They just find their way to dig out of those kind of long runs that teams still sometimes can go on against them, and they're just not as phased, and they just fight through it, and they're just a battle-tested adversity fueled team that just they don't flinch. In terms of the 1 seed, though, final thing here on Tennessee basketball coming out of this weekend, it seems like it's going to take like a Arizona upset in the final 2 against UCLA or USC for Tennessee to find their way into a 1 seed. But what more can Tennessee do to establish themselves as a final number 1 seed for that 4th spot down the stretch here, Ryan Schumpert?
Win the game schedule. I mean, I don't know what else there ever is for you to do besides go out there and win against who you have. And I mean, Tennessee has more good opportunities, 2 more quad 1 win opportunities in a regular season. They'll have better opportunities in the SEC tournament than Arizona will in the Pac-12 tournament. I will say, obviously, that Sunday game for Tennessee or in the SEC hasn't seemed to matter a ton in terms of seeding in the past. But I mean, to me, Tennessee wins both games this week, and they win on, may make it to Sunday of the SEC championship or SEC tournament. I just have a hard time thinking they're not going to be a 1 seed. Like, Tennessee's going to even themselves up with quad 1 wins. They can even themselves up with quad 1 wins with Arizona this week. And if Florida finishes strong, if Florida beats Alabama and gets in the top 30 in net, they can pull ahead this week and get another quad 1 win from that way, which is kind of ridiculous when you talk about the net. But I don't know. And you talk about Arizona having much worse losses than Tennessee. I think, again, Tennessee's got to win the games on their schedule, which is no easy task because they play 2 more hard teams, and the SEC is super deep, so they'll have some hard matchups in the tournament. But I think Tennessee controls their own destiny when it comes to earning a 1 seed.
If they drop one of South Carolina, Kentucky, Ethan, do you think that's over in terms of them getting a 1 seed?
I don't necessarily think it's over because, to be honest, I agree with everything Ryan said. I don't understand exactly why Tennessee isn't ahead of Arizona as it is. I mean, the Vols don't have any worse losses. They have similar wins. I mean, the only thing Arizona really has over Tennessee is all the way back on November 10th that went over Duke and Cameron. And, I mean, they've lost, I think it was to Stanford and maybe Oregon State, Arizona did. Tennessee doesn't have a loss even close to that bad. I mean, even close to that bad. Like, that game against A&M was not good, but A&M is miles better than Oregon State is, miles better than Stanford is. So if they lose to Kentucky in a close game, I don't even necessarily think that puts them out of the running, especially if they do really well in the SEC tournament. Like Ryan said, there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, Tennessee, if they get the 1 seed, they absolutely will have deserved it. Absolutely will have deserved it, because this South Carolina team, even though their KenPom rating, even though their numbers rating on the computers aren't too high, I mean, they're good. They're a good team. And Kentucky is playing excellent right now. Their defense is getting better. So if Tennessee can knock off both of them, I don't see how Arizona gets it over them. They just don't have enough. I mean, maybe Washington State if they get to the championship game, but Arizona just doesn't have enough good games remaining. So if Tennessee just wins, maybe even loses to Kentucky and wins all the way to the SEC championship game, even loses the SEC championship game, I can't imagine them not getting it over Arizona.
I just am a cautiously optimistic about it person, where if they run the table, I think it's gonna be hard to keep them out. But I also just, when the narrative is just looming that it's Arizona's to lose, that it just seems like Tennessee's on the outside looking in. It just makes me a little uncomfortable, going into this final week of the regular season, because we know the SEC tournament doesn't matter in terms of where Tennessee will be seeding wise come NCAA tournament time. But I don't know, Ryan, what do you think?
I would agree with the way you phrased that question, Ethan. I think if Tennessee loses one, they probably do need help. They need another bad loss from Arizona. And to me, the thing more than anything about Arizona's resume that gets me, and look, I get they have a lot of really good wins in non-conference play. There's 2 other teams with a pulse in the Pac-12, and Washington State's one of them. They swept them. They got swept by one of the 2 good teams in the conference. What are we doing here? Not only do they have 2 terrible losses, they got swept by one of the 2 good teams in the conference. So that's the thing that as much as any of it. Again, I get they played a really good non-conference schedule. They have a bunch of good wins in the non-conference, but that's the part that really sticks with me.
And why do you think it doesn't matter to the folks that are penciling in Arizona as that final 1 seed? What are we missing here?
Is it just as simple as the metrics? Like, is it just as simple as quad 1 wins? Like, that's the area that, as of right now, Arizona still has a definitive advantage on Tennessee. And, you know, I'm not a bracketologist, but that's where I'd point to. And that's why I think Tennessee can even it up and take the lead on it in the next 2 weeks before Selection Sunday, which is why I ultimately do think Tennessee controls their own destiny.
I don't understand it myself. I don't understand how Arizona's ranked above Tennessee right now. It doesn't make much sense to me. I mean, they have the same record. Arizona has worse wins, and honestly, they're only slightly ahead in the very good wins too. And all of those came a while ago.
So it's Sunday night, March 3rd. Let's say Tennessee sweeps this slate here, which is unbelievable if they go 4-0 with this monstrous. I mean, this part you wonder, and you're like, well, they just got through Auburn and Alabama, so that's big time. And theoretically, Kentucky and South Carolina should be an easier week than what they just got through 2-0. But let's just say Tennessee wins both games this week. Ryan Schumpert, do you believe they get a 1 seed if they sweep this week?
I'll say yes.
Okay.
I think they, again, I don't know if it's.
And let's also say Arizona wins out too.
Doesn't matter.
Arizona wins out.
Yeah. I don't know if it's as a whole that the SEC tournament doesn't matter, if it's just that the Sunday game doesn't matter. So maybe I'd say Tennessee needs to get 1 win. They need to win on Friday in Nashville too. But yeah, I think if they win this week, especially because I think Florida's going to beat Alabama on Tuesday night, and if they do that, then that Florida win's probably going to get moved into a quad 1 win too, or a quad 1 win as well, which obviously would go a long way.
Ethan, what do you think? Arizona and Tennessee went out this week. Who gets that final 1 seed?
Yeah, I mean, barring your point earlier of it just being Arizona and they like Arizona, but there's no reason Tennessee shouldn't get it. I agree with all the points Ryan's made. That Tennessee will have a better resume. They'll have worse losses. And I mean, to be honest, they look better. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on Arizona basketball, but there's not many teams operating at a higher efficiency than Tennessee right now.
No, and it's you want to enjoy this stuff. You want to make sure that you're taking the time to enjoy what's happening here with Tennessee. And this is a special season, and we're going to ultimately see how it all unfolds here, but it's going to be fun down the stretch here as we get into more tense games, more tense atmospheres, but also big time college basketball here in Everything School HQ. Buy or sell as we transition a little bit here to some Vol football talk here, Ryan Schumpert. Chris Brazzell leads. I was thinking about this week. Chris Brazzell leads Tennessee in receiving yards and touchdowns in 2024. Are you buying or selling that this early part of the spring?
I'm selling that. I mean, it's twofold. One, for him to lead in both. Like, that's just a bold statement. And I don't know. Like, to me, the harder question is, will he be Tennessee's best receiver? Because then I'm like, yeah, that's a really tough conversation. Then I might say yes, just because I like his ceiling the most of anybody. But when you're talking about him against the field and what's a pretty balanced receivers room, at least seems to me to be a balanced receivers room, I got to sell on that.
I think it's one of those where Dante Thornton obviously still in the room, and he'll factor in as well, barring a spring transfer for any of these guys, because you never know in today's college football that you never know 100% what the room's going to look like until we get to fall camp. But I mean, Ethan, when you think about it, is it if Chris Brazzell ends up leading Tennessee in receiving and or touchdowns, which would be bigger potentially for Tennessee if Brazzell has like a Javonte Payton type impact, or just a lot of touchdowns on a lot of big plays, but not necessarily a lot of consistent receptions in a Squirrel White role? or would it matter more if he's in the receiving yards category and kind of like a Jalen Hyatt situation where he's taking the top off and he's actually leading the team in that way?
With Brazel being 6'5" and seeing the balls that he was able to catch in a rushing offense at Tulane, I think it would matter more if he was more of a Javonte Payton. Catching, being the red zone target, being the threat for those back shoulder passes, or being able to do that, letting Squirrel Wright, the crazy amount of speed that Tennessee has in kind of the short passing game, letting them do that and having Brazel be the touchdown guy. And also, to answer your question, I think I agree with Ryan. I think I'd sell on him leading both. I could see a world in which he'd leave in touchdown. I mean, he was a strong red zone target at Tulane. I believe he had the most touchdown catches on their team. He led the team in receiving yards. Like I said, they weren't exactly a pass-happy team, but he brings a lot in his height, I think, is the thing that's being overlooked. I still think Squirrel is probably going to be the best receiver on the team. I think if I had to put my money somewhere, I'd say that it'd be Squirrel. But it's very intriguing. Coming to the team is very intriguing just for those reasons, just because he could be a legitimate touchdown threat right there alongside Brew McCoy, and how dependable I think he could be in catching the ball.
I just feel like Brazel is going to be a star. I don't know. Just my gut is I think Brazel is going to work out in a major way for Tennessee. You also have Brew coming back from just a brutal injury. We'll see how much he factors in right out of the gate here. Maybe they take it slow with him, and maybe he ends up gobbling a lot of red zone touchdowns. He's a safety net for Nico. We'll see what that relationship looks like. My gut, I mean, if I had to say right now in March, I think the best case scenario for Tennessee is Brazel leads in touchdowns and Squirrel leads in receiving yards. I think that's a really good year, and that means things are firing in all cylinders if that's the case. If that's where you're at, and those are the big three, and then obviously some production from Staley and Mike Matthews as freshmen too would go a long way. But I am really interested with how Brazel factors in and how the hype surrounds him because of last year with Dante Thornton, and I wonder if maybe he benefits from less attention this spring and summer because they're like, oh, well, so many fans got really obsessed with Dante Thornton's arrival and taking the top off the defense and what we saw in Eugene. Maybe that helps Chris Brazel, who had a lot more production too coming into Tennessee from Tulane, a lot more in that regard. So I don't know. I'm just I would gobble up a lot of Chris Brazel stock right now if you are not already. That's where I lean right now. True or false? The Vols need the tempo of 2022 to get back into serious contention in 2024, Ethan Stone. That's something I've also been thinking about this week.
You think they need it?
I'm wondering, because the tempo was not the same this past year with Joe, and it was
wasn't.
for a multitude of reasons. I'm certain as to why the tempo wasn't as fast as what we saw in the special season that was 2022. But do you think that's necessary for Tennessee to be elite again? Is that they have to be that super, super fast, all systems go offense to be atop the SEC in scoring?
See, that's kind of asking. I feel like people are going to be asking a lot out of Nico Iamaleava. Obviously, as they should. I mean, he showed a lot against Iowa. He showed that. I think something that was surprising about his game against Iowa, especially, is how good he was with his legs, and that seems to favor what you're saying here about the tempo. Because I mean, if Nico can be that constant rushing threat with the speed they have with Dylan Sampson in the backfield, with all these weapons at wide receiver, especially with what Chris Brazel has shown that he can do at Tulane. We'll see if it can translate against SEC defensive backs. But with the talent, the speed, how big everybody is, the receivers, you got that tight end out of Notre Dame coming in as well. I mean, the offense should be able to go at that pace, but it's all going to come back to Nico. I mean, it's just what he's most comfortable with. And he's shown that he's a better running quarterback than Joe was already, in my opinion. And I think they could use that big to their advantage. Do I think it's absolutely necessary for them to be at that level? I mean, that's asking him to be Hendon Hooker again. And I'm just not 100% certain that's exactly what we're going to get. he might be a different kind of type of player for that. I mean, remember, this is his first real season running the program, I feel like. So it's tough to say in March. It's tough to say they absolutely have to have that level of speed. Would it help them? Absolutely. I mean, that's when Josh Heupel's offenses are at their best. So if he can move that quickly, if they can move at that speed to be with the 2022 team, that's probably where they could get the most amount of their firepower. I could agree with that.
What do you think, Ryan?
My initial thought when I read it earlier is kind of what Ethan said of like, yeah, it helps. I don't know how necessary it is. But, thinking on it more, that I would point out and why maybe it is sneakily more important is just the fact that, look, this is year 4 of Heupel. A lot of these SEC teams are pretty familiar with the tempo. You're not gonna get the big chunk plays because they're not ready when the play's set. But you look at 2 of Tennessee's 3 biggest games this year. You got Oklahoma, who's new to the conference. You haven't played them one time. And you got Alabama with a brand new coaching staff in. And all coaches not from the SEC. And, Kane Womack obviously was at South Alabama, but no SEC ties before that, was at Indiana. So I kind of think that sneakily maybe makes it more important. Again, maybe that doesn't mean they can't be really good offensively without it, but that is maybe something where they can get one over into probably the 2 biggest toss-up games of the season. When we look at it here in March, they can get one over on those teams, and in 2 games that I think are going to be really competitive. Probably, if the Vegas set a line today, I would think both those would be 4 or 5 points or less. A big play here or there can make a huge difference, and especially with a 12-team playoff, the difference in winning 1 and certainly 2 of those games could mean, playing meaningful football in December.
I think for me, it's just going to be fascinating because, like you said, year 4 part of this is so intriguing of like, can Tennessee be top 10, top 7 in scoring nationally again if they're not in that top group in tempo once again? Do they continue to evolve? Do we see more wrinkles? Do we see Tennessee play a different style? Also be just because Nico's different than Hendon. He's different than Joe. And what that looks like over the course of a full season, I think is going to be really fun and really something fun to monitor, especially early on. Is like, do we see the Tennessee of 2022 right out of the gate of just that electric, quick, we're going to go super fast. Nico's been in the system for 2 years and he's going to operate at a totally different level, efficiency wise? Or do we see them kind of just continue to evolve and not worry about tempo as much and beat teams in different ways? So this is something that I'm very, very curious about heading into year 4 here under Josh Heupel. Final Tennessee football thing that I wanted to pick your brains on. Vols new over-under, because it started off at 8.5. Now it's been bet up to 9.5. So there's a lot of Vols optimism right now among those that are keeping up with the SEC here, months out the start of the 2024 regular season. But 4th best title odds now in the conference, and 9.5 for Tennessee. When you hear that number, Ryan, and you see stock rising for Tennessee, what does that say to you about, and how much does that change how you're viewing Tennessee in year 4 under Heupel?
To me, it's just a number that made more sense to begin with. I never really got 8.5. That felt low to me. Not necessarily when you're talking about Tennessee's team, but when you're talking about the schedule. I would say at 9.5, to me, I guess I don't know what it says, or it makes you feel, if Tennessee is going to win 10 games, you got to beat NC State, which is, like, to me, the 4th hardest game on the schedule, and a little bit of a swing game, a game you should win. But again, like, Tennessee hasn't always looked great early in the season. Have they ever looked great early in the season under Heupel? I mean, it took them an absolute dogfight to beat a backup quarterback at Pitt 2 years ago, and they won 10 games and beat Alabama. So that's the one that, when you're talking about winning 10 games, is an absolute must, because when I just look around outside those 3 SEC games I talked about earlier, like, I don't see the loss. Mississippi State, Kentucky at home, Vanderbilt on the road, Arkansas on the road. I don't see it. And I think when you talk about just having those Alabama and Oklahoma games, to me, I think Tennessee probably, most logically splits those. So to me, that's kind of the path to 10-2. And obviously NC State's the one you have to win.
It's interesting. You're NC State. I'm just not really nervous about NC State. NC State doesn't really scare me as Tennessee fan alum here. I don't know, Ethan. Does Ryan's scheduling point make the most sense to you? It's just that, like, when you look at the schedule, 9.5 just makes the most sense because Tennessee is going to be favored. I mean, they were favored at what, in 10 games last year? I think Tennessee was right around there. Ultimately, they ended up going 8-4, but I think they were favored in 10 games, if I remember correctly, at the time of kickoff. I think that's going to be the case again. Like, I think they're going to be right around. I mean, we'll see with Alabama at home. I think it's fair to assume at this point that they'll probably be favored against Bama at home this fall. We'll see how it ultimately plays out. But, I mean, outside of Georgia, I don't see any glaring. Oklahoma, maybe on the road, is probably your 2 games where you're not favored. I don't know. It's hard to find those. And I think that's why, to Ryan's point, 9.5 feels right because just Tennessee's going to be favored in a lot of these games again, and Tennessee has a great chance to win double-digit games for the second time in the regular season in the Heupel era. Don't you think?
Yeah, it's weird for me to hear you say that Tennessee could be favored against Alabama, and I don't think you're totally crazy. Tennessee could absolutely be favored at home against Alabama. I mean, we're underestimating how much. Well, I don't think we're underestimating. I'm just going to go away from that train of thought. Alabama without Nick Saban is very obviously going to be different. I mean, there's a way we could look up and Alabama's lost 3 games by the time that they get to Tennessee. There's a way we could look up and they've lost no games also. I mean, obviously he did great things at Washington. To answer your question, I agree with all of Ryan's points. The scheduling is the main reason why. You have to think about it. The Vols are missing Missouri on that schedule. They're missing Texas on that schedule. They're missing Ole Miss on that schedule. And I think that's a big reason why 4th in the SEC is why we're sitting where they are. Why 4th is very much in the realm of possibility because, you know, Georgia's going to be tough. Obviously, it's in Athens. That's going to be very tough. Alabama, I understand everything I just said. It's still probably going to be at the very least a competitive game because it's Tennessee, Alabama. It's 3rd Saturday in October. Oklahoma's one I think I'm putting a little more emphasis on, and not because I think Oklahoma is necessarily all that. I mean, they're probably going to be a middle of the pack SEC team. I think they're going to struggle year one in the SEC. I think they're going to be worse off than Texas, obviously, with what they have going on over there. But I don't know. There's just something about it. Early season, you got to go to Norman. It is in Norman, right? It's not in Knoxville?
No, it's in Norman, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, and so, I mean, you got to go there early in the season. NC State will have just happened very soon after. I don't know exactly when it is. I'm not too perfectly plugged in, but I know it's very soon after NC State. So that Oklahoma one, that's going to be the important one. And if you can win that Oklahoma one, 9.5 over should easy be the log, because there's not really even anybody I could see like making that Missouri jump that they did last year, you know? Like, I mean, people thought Missouri was going to be okay. I don't think anyone thought Missouri was going to be top 3 in the conference good, though. And, I mean, Mississippi State's not going to do that. I don't see Kentucky doing that. Auburn is my team that I think could do that for what it's worth, and they're not on the schedule either. So it's a very favorable schedule for Tennessee. 9.5 and 4th in the SEC, I think, are very plausible.
And look, it's easy to overlook this. It's not like a formality, but Heupel's lost 1 home game in the last 2 years. And it was against arguably the best team in the country. Like, it was against Georgia. That's it. That's the end of the list, is Georgia at home in the last 2 years. Like, there's a reason he had that win streak coming into the Georgia game last year, and it obviously didn't go the way he wanted it to, but a lot of great home games. Like, you get Florida back at home. That's important. You get Kentucky at home. You get Mississippi State at home. You get Alabama at home. Obviously the biggest one out of anybody. Actually, I'd probably say Florida, probably the more important to get at home based on just Tennessee sports history, Tennessee football history, that is. But I just think, to y'all's point, it's really at Oklahoma and it's at Georgia. And then I don't see any other scare. I mean, it's kind of wild that NC State might be the 4th most difficult test on the schedule, but I think a lot of that is because it's at a neutral site and it's early in the Nico era, and we'll see how it looks. And it could feel like the Pitt game from 2 years ago early on, because NC State's a good team. They're a 9-10 win team in the ACC, and they should be good again this year. But Grayson McCall should be under center for them, and we'll see if they can keep up with Tennessee. But I don't know. Either way, you're feeling good, because if you hit the over there, I think you're a playoff team. I think it's going to be very hard to see a scenario where a 10-2 SEC team misses out on the playoff this year. So if you get to 10, it's the march to 10, I think, for the Vols, and I think you're in. Final thing here. Ryan, this weekend, Tennessee baseball, run ruled Bowling Green, all 3 games. We get 3 different pitchers. No AJ Russell, who they're being extra cautious with. The biggest standouts to you, though, from the weekend that was, as the Tennessee Volunteers continue on their long win streak here out of the gate.
2 guys, one on the mound and one behind the plate. But AJ Causey, I mean, he's one of the guys that I thought was, sneakily an option for the third starting spot, and he was really good in his first opportunity. I mean, really dominant, and 7 innings, walks 1, gives up a solo homer. I think strikes out like 8, does it on like 78 pitches. Just incredibly efficient, especially when you talk about those high strikeout numbers. So again, it's just Bowling Green. It's just one start, but he couldn't have been any better. And now in 2 of 3 appearances this year, he's been really good. And one of those other appearances was a long relief outing against Texas Tech, who's, at least one of the 2 best teams you've played to this point in the season. So Causey won, and then Cannon Peebles. And I wasn't really worried about Cannon Peebles just because we already had a long track record of him last year as a true freshman at North Carolina State, being really productive with his bat. But he'd gotten off to a slow start to the season at the plate. Fantastic this weekend, 5 of 7 at the plate, added a walk. He didn't start on Friday. Cal Start got to start behind the plate. But going back to the High Point game in the midweek, that's last 3 games that Peebles has played in, multiple hits in all 3 games. Feels like he's kind of relaxing, calming into things, and getting into a groove, and is looking like the really solid bat in Tennessee's lineup that we thought he was going to be.
I also just kind of love the option still. Like, it seems like AJ Russell obviously taking the time off on Friday night. So you get some AJ Causey, as you just alluded to, who looked great. And he's gotten a lot of work out of the gate. He has experience. I believe he was the Friday night guy for Jacksonville State last year. So you have that in your back pocket. No Xander today. Xander was not the starter for the first Sunday of the season, but get some work either way. And then you get to see different guys. Like, it could still be Nate Snead. You can't count him out in this role. But Derek Schaefer, another freshman, he looks solid. I mean, do you think this continues where they just keep mixing and matching these guys, and kind of it might be a blessing in disguise that AJ is out for a little bit to be careful and just to see what some of these guys look like in these Friday and Sunday roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thin line there. I think if AJ's back and pitching at Alabama in 2 weeks, I think it's going to be a good thing for Tennessee.
Oh,
And
yeah,
he
yeah,
looks good. I think it's
before
gonna
that.
be
I'm
a
just
good
talking
thing.
about before SEC play.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely think so, because it gives you another spot to tinker with. And again, that's been I think I've said it on here, one of the questions with AJ is he threw 30 innings last year, and now he's stepping into being an ace in SEC. That's a big change in workload. So just to lessen that, I think would be a big win for Tennessee. So yeah, Kansas State on Tuesday night's really interesting. I would think Nate Snead starts. He didn't throw at all this weekend. At the bare minimum, he's going to throw a ton in that game. I think it would make a lot of sense for him to start. Especially since they did end up using Xander today out of the bullpen. I don't really even know who their other option would be to use in that game. So I think it does work out well just to give a bunch of guys opportunities, because there's not a ton of obvious candidates. And I think some of those guys they think play better out of the bullpen, and it gives them some good options there. And it doesn't feel, at this point, to me, it doesn't feel like either freshmen are ready to be starting an SEC play. Doesn't mean they can't be ready in 2 months when you're starting to roll in the postseason and the games really, really pick up. But yeah, I think it's good to try those options. And I think Causey made a really strong case for why he's a really solid option.
And then finally, I think Christian Moore settling at the leadoff spot is actually a blessing in disguise. Like, I understand you want to have him to be able to knock some guys in, but he's batting, 420, something around there right now. I mean, Christian Moore is just your most versatile hitter and probably your safest, OBP guy of anyone in the lineup. It's something we didn't have before the year, as Christian Moore being the most likely long-term option at leadoff this year. But I think that works. I think the lineup we saw yesterday is probably some variation of the best lineup that Tennessee can trot out on any given day. But I just look at that and I think that's solid. If he settles in there and he's your one, I think you feel really good about that. And you just kind of want Christian Moore to get the most amount of bats of anybody, I think, in one sense, just because I think he's your most talented, maybe as a whole, just the most important fixture in the lineup, and you want him to get as many at bats as possible. And when you're in the leadoff spot, he's just going to get a bunch of opportunities, right?
Definitely, and that's kind of why I liked him at the 2-hole to start the season. But
Yeah.
at least the top of the lineup, Tennessee wants to do the righty, lefty, and there's just not a left-handed option that makes a whole lot of sense in that leadoff spot. And I think you feel a lot better too because Kavares Tears has lived up to the expectations and the buzz that he was going to have a breakout season, and you feel really good about him in the cleanup spot. And you still can have Billy Amick and Kavares Tears and some version of Robin Villanueva or Cannon Peebles right in the middle of the lineup, and this offense is just deep enough that you can take out one of your best hitters that you wanted in the middle of the lineup and move them into the leadoff spot, and you can kind of be fine there. You still have plenty of power in the middle of the lineup. You still have plenty of dudes that you trust to drive in guys when dudes get on base, and yeah, it feels like he settled in there. I mean, for as much tinkering as Tony has done this season to date, obviously we're not that far into it with the lineup. All weekend, 1 through 4 was the exact same. I think they're starting to settle in, at least at those spots of what they want that to look like.
Ethan Stone, what can the good folks check out from you all across the internet this week?
Yes, I've kind of moved into a new role with the broader company at Saturday Down South, but still plugging on over there at SDS Saturday Tradition. Saturday Road, obviously, as March Madness kind of kicks into gear, we'll have full coverage of that over at all of our brands. And just excited for some basketball. Excited for the basketball to start.
I love it. Ryan, what about you and the good folks over there at RockyTopInsider.com?
Yeah, plenty of Tennessee basketball and baseball stuff. I mean, that'll carry today this week. Tennessee basketball chasing a championship, 5 games for Tennessee baseball. I'll be over there, I think 3 days. Jack will be over there all week. And then Tennessee football's new assistant coach hires talking to the media tomorrow. So we'll have coverage of that and those press conferences up on our YouTube page shortly after they're done. So plenty of stuff in all 3 big sports.
I love it. Go check those out. I mean, what are you doing if you don't have Saturday Down South and Rocky Top Insider bookmarked as a college football and Tennessee fan already? Ryan, Ethan, thank you guys as always, and I'll talk to y'all next week.